And now I could share the daf. What is it? What is it? Okay, so we are 6 lines from the top on daf Kuf Zayin Amar Aleph, and it's the first word on the line, Amar Apapa. Sorry for
Well,
my delay.
what?
I had a little bit of a delay, an unscheduled delay.
But I'm here.
Okay, Baruch Hashem. So before we start, I want to share a nice word that I heard from Rabbi Breidowitz today. Now, I once went to a dinner that Aguda sponsored for Magidei Shir. It was before Pesach. And someone spoke, I don't remember who, and he said, I remember when I was a child, one day the phone rang in my house, and there was a Moshe Feinstein to go to the door, and he wanted to speak to my father. I was like, wow, well, why would Moshe Feinstein call my father? But after he hung up, I asked my father, what did Moshe want from you? So he said, I stand up here in Mishir, and this was before the days of Arch Rule and Mesifta and the different Shurim online, and I was stuck on the Gemara. So what did they do in those days? They went to a chasna. Reb Moshe was but a chasna. So he went over to Reb Moshe and he asked him shot in the Gemara. And Reb Moshe told him shot. And Reb Moshe called me back to say, I thought if it was an honorable shot, maybe this is the right shot. So he called to tell me. So this fellow was saying that my father, on a regular basis, would get phone calls from Gedolei Ador or Shivas, and I realized that that was one of the fringe benefits of not having all these learning aids, that you had to reach out and develop relationships with these Gedolei Yisrael, because how else did you get shot in the Gemara that you otherwise wouldn't be able to? So when I heard that, I decided that I want to try to use Daf Yomi to create relationships. So every time I'm near Rebbe or Shiva, I always ask him something, anything about the Daf. So I asked Rebbe Breidowitz, we just learned Kol Omer Dovar B'Shem Omerei, maybe Gula. And I asked him, I understand we have a Raya from Mordechai from Esther, but Lamaita, what's the reason? What does Dover B'Shem Omerei have to do with Gula? So he told me over from the Maral. He said that the Maral says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to pick the Goyel, going to pick the Mashiach, he doesn't want a Balgaiva, somebody who wants credit for everything. For Karen, he wants somebody who won't take credit for what's not his. And he wants to remain Adel and Banivis. So I said, Oy Bazoi, wow, that opens up my eyes. Because I thought, maybe Gula Oil means, and that's chus, it creates Gula for the belt. So the Moral, no. Maybe Gula Oil, you yourself will be Zoich the Mashiach. If you want to be the Goyel, you should say Dover B'Shem Oimeri, and then you will be the Goyel. You will actually be the Goyel. So I didn't accept that was Pshat until he told me the Maral. So he said, yeah, Pshat is you will be maybe Gula. So I thought that was a nice Pshat.
So I have a question. I have a question for you.
Please.
So why didn't you come yet?
So then he said over a very cute part about plagiarizing and taking credit. So he said in Kamenetz, they once had a Mesiba for the Talmidim. And the Talmud, one of the Talmidim, they were Mechaberim, he was a Baal Menachem, so they were Mechaberim to sing a niggin. So the Talmud said, the niggin that I'm going to sing now is an original niggin. And he sang a beautiful shtickle. And someone says, you're a shakman, it's not an original niggin, that's a famous Yosel Rosenblatt shtickle. So he turns around and tells the guy, Undubus Nishkan Ganiv. The Chabur you said last week, Chabus Gazen in Yen Sefer, Bizarre Ganiv. So the Rav said, there's a big difference between someone who steals a niggin and someone who steals a shtickle tire. Someone who steals a niggin, everybody knows it's Yam Veda, everyone knows whose niggin is. That's like Goslin. Someone who steals a shtickle tire is a Gadol, because nobody chops even that he stole it. Because who's going to know that safer? So that was the shtickle tire. Developing. Exactly Gemara. Amar Papa. Hi Arisa Didaloi. Now they used to irrigate their fields by digging small ditches through their fields. And how would they get water into those ditches? They would take a long pipe, like an eaves, like a half a pipe, and they would extend one end to the beginning of their ditch, the other end close to a river or a well, and then someone would take a bucket, fill the bucket up, pour it into that half a pipe. It would channel the water down into the ditch and continue to irrigate his field. So Zokra Papa, and I'm going to learn it according to Rashi, Haya Risa de Daloi. If you're pouring water into that pipe that goes into the ditch, and somebody decides that he's going to stick his hand into the pipe to catch the water running down into the ditch, that wouldn't be good for Netila Shaddai. Ein noitlin mimenu lo yodai. The loy also mikoyach gav. Zokt Rashi. What does that mean? Loy also mikoyach gav. We know that you have to have koyach gavra to pour the water. So I'm reading Rashi, the third line from the top. Ein noitlin mimenu lo yodai. Lo says yodav l'soifei. To put your hands into that pipe, v'yikalchu hamayim l'soicham, and the water will run down your hand, and it's as if that guy's pouring it on your hand. That doesn't work. The lav mikoyach gavra also. That's not coming from the force of a spill. That's just gravity bringing the water down the pipe. Shikfar over koyach hashoifech, and now ve'in mekalchen me'eleh. Therefore, ve'in kan loy netila. Not netila because no one's pouring water on you. But maybe it's tvila. No. The word tvila netila lav mikoyach gavra also. Tvila nami b'tziner lesa. She'in kan shir mikvah. In that little pipe, there's no shir mikvah. So therefore, it wouldn't work. However, Zokar Papa, the mikriv lagabadula, if where you dip your hand into this pipe is right where he's dumping the water, so he's not dumping the water on you, that's mamish netila, but it's right downstream of that, then the water coming over your hands is not just gravity, it's still from the inertia of him dumping the water from the bucket, then noitlin mimenu liyadai. Then you would be able to be noitlin mimenu liyadai. Now, what happens? A very interesting scenario. What if there was a little hole in this keli, big enough of a hole that water would get in it if you pushed it down into water? That also means that if water was in it, there would be a steady, visible stream running out of it. So this guy is using a bucket. He's taking water from the river. He lifts the bucket out of the river. There's a stream of water coming from the bottom of the bucket back into the river. Simultaneously, he's pouring it into this pipe. So now there's a direct connection from the river to the bucket into the pipe. So if there was that connection, we would say that all of those waters are connected. And then you can make tefillah because it's like you retoivel your hands in the river itself. Now, of course, Rashi doesn't speak out that for Tvila, Mamish, this wouldn't work. We know Tvila, two things have to happen. First of all, the hole has to be much bigger than Kodesh Mashka. It has to be two fingers that can move around. It has to be like a couple of inches to make a shaka. A. And B is up Toisvis. You don't say Nitzuk Chibur. But the Baltis is only Nitzilis. The Rabbanon are Mekel, and they'll consider it connected for the purposes of Nitzilis Shadai. So let me ask you a simple question. Based on the Gemara that we just learned, are you allowed to just take a bucket of water and dip your hands into it? And that would be a good tefillah?
No.
Definitely not. Because only if it's connected to the source. But if you look at Tosfos says, Pirish balachas gedolos temuter lahatil yodayim b'soich hakli techashiva netila, and he brings riots. But Zok Tosfos clearly our sugya is not agreeable to that. So now I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom of the Tosfos, and Tosfos later at the bottom says v'tzarich lahachmir. We have to be machmir, not to be toivel our hands in a keli like the Bahad. The Kivan, the Sugya, the Shmaitzin, Rebbe Yosy. Our Sugya clearly holds like Rebbe Yosy, who Tosfos earlier states, hold that you cannot toivel your hands in a keli. Now we have another question. When we wash Nagelwasser, one second, I want to make sure that I have the right Shtickle. Yeah, when we wash Negavasser, we usually go back and forth 3 times. I'm not going to do it 4 times, but for the Tila, you go back and forth 3 times. Why do you do 3 times? Why don't you do just once? So if you look at Tosfos, 6 lines up in the skinny lines, Tosfos explains to us how it works. The Tzarech Lishboich Mayim al Yod of Gimel Pam. What for? Pam Rishona is Kedei Lahaver Tit V'Dover Achaytes Mal Yodai. The first one is just a prep for the washing to get rid of the dirt. Then Upam Shniya, that's the actual Natila Letar Yoda. Upam Shlishis, and the third time is Letar Oisen Mayim, to be Matar the water that was used to be Matar Yoda. So that's how Tosfos learns that we go back and forth 3 times. Now, Duchtach, when we wash for bread, we only go back and forth twice. Maybe because our hands aren't dirty, so we only need twice. I'm not sure. Tosfos says when you wash, we go back and forth 3 times. Zog to Gemara Vayter.
The 4 times you're talking about is in the morning. You were talking about.
Yeah, in the morning we do 4 times.
Yeah, it's for the
now,
eyes.
We're going to see soon in Tosfos that the Ruach Hara of Negavasser is in a whole league of its own. So let's see the Gemara Vayter. V'amarava kli shenike b'koinish mashka. You had a keli that had a hole in it that was big enough that water would come in. Now, if you have a tiny little pinhole in a keli and water drips out of it, that would not make it ois keli. But if the hole is big enough that if you push down this empty keli into a body of water, water would force its way in through that hole. That's a little bit bigger hole than just a pinhole. Then it loses its status of a keli, and you cannot use it for Netilas Yadayim. Another halach, v'yomer Rava, kli she'ein by revius. You have a kli, it could be a very big kli, but it doesn't even have a revius mayim. So you're starting off with less than a revius mayim. You can't wash. You need to have a revius in the cup to start with. I'm going to show you that you don't need a revius in the cup. Because v'yomer Rava, you know what's a problem? Cliche maxic revius. If the keli can't even hold the revius, that's when you have a problem. Then eitla a night minly die. Maxic, but if it actually could hold a revius, even though there's not actually a revius in it, it would be kosher for the Netilas Yadayim. So we have a stira. One Rava says the keli has to have a minimum of a revius, and the other Rava said the keli could have less than a revius, and it's still going to be good for Netilas Yadayim. Zog to Gemara loy kasha. It's not a contradiction. Holachad holatrei. If you're only washing one set of hands, you need to have a minimum of a revius. But what if you had a minimum of a revius, and one person washed, and he left over water, less than a revius, but he left over water that now a second fellow wants to wash, he could wash with it. Rashi says, you know why? And the Gemara is going to say as well, because it started off with water that had in it enough to be mitahir. So it's almost like it's not a sheer revius, you need to wash yourself. In order to activate water, that the water should be good to be mitahir your hands, you need to activate by having a minimum of a revius. As Rashi says, umishiyare tahira also. Even though now there's less than a revius, but that you started your Netilas Yadayim for the first person with a revius, so now this water is still active. Zok to Gemara Vayter, the Tanya, we even have a brisa that supports this chiddush, because the brisa says may revius, if you have exactly a revius, noitlim liyadayim leechad va'afilu l'shnayim. 2 people could use the same revius. Obviously, by the time the second fellow washes his hands, he's starting off with less than a revius. Amalei Rav Sheshes la Meimar. Sheshes asked the Meimar, Kapdisu amana, are you makbid to have a keli that's complete and not broken? Amalein, yes I am. Akazusa, are you makbid that the water should be clear water, not cloudy, dirty water? Amalein, yes. Ashiura, are you makbid that there should be a revius? Amalein. Ikadami, there's another nusach that said, Haki Amar le, amana v'achazusa kapdina, I'm makbid to have amana, a complete keli. I'm makbid that the water should be clear, but Ashiura like kapdina, it doesn't have to be a revius. Why? The Tanya may revius, noitlin liyadayim le'echad v'afilu l'shnayim. But v'loi, that doesn't prove that you could use less than a revius. Rather, like what we said earlier, Chani Hosam, You started off with the revius, and now you use some of it for the first person. The remainder you can use for the second person. Now, people needed a keli that was a revius. How did you know if your keli was a revius? You had to measure it against a keli that we knew was established that had a revius. So they were rabbanim that actually created sample kalim to allow people to measure with. So asking Rabashi Behutzal, asking Reb Yaakov Minar Pekoi, not Labas Reviasa. He made a keli that held a revius out of glass that people could use to measure their own kalim if it was a revius. And asking Rabashi Behutzal Kuzabas Reviasa, he made this sample keli out of cheres. V'yama Rava. Meguvas chavis. Now the meguva of a chavis is like a conic piece of cheres that sits in the opening of the jug to block it. They would smear around it to seal it. Now that meguvas chavis, according to Rashi, it doesn't have a base kibble. But if you kratzed out a base kibble in it, now it had a base kibble. Shetikna noitlin mimenu yadayim. That's a good keli. If it holds a revius, you could use it for the tilas yadayim. Tosfos learns a meguva in its natural state has a cavity in it that it's a revius. So what needs to be fixed? The problem is it's pointed at the bottom, it can't stand. That's not a good keli. But if you flatten the bottom and now you could stand it up, noitlin mimenu liyadayim. Tanya nami hachi meguvas chavish shetikna noitlin mimenu liyadayim.
Isn't according to Rashi that it has the base kibble, but it wasn't made for a base kibble?
Let's look at Rashi. Maybe I made a mistake. Shetikna chakika. You dug it out, lekabel revius. Oh, but it says avagav de meikar lav lishtamushi b'gavavida ven chalala asu l'toichai. So you're right. Rashi says it did have a halal. You did have a halal, but the halal is not made to use. But it obviously wasn't the revius because Rashi is chakika. You actually enlarged it. So maybe it has the base kibble, but it doesn't have a revius base kibble, and you enlarged it.
The chakika just made it now it's a base kibble. Before it wasn't.
But it had a chalala. What was the purpose of chakika? If it already is chalal, if it already has an opening, what's the chakika required?
It wasn't made to use it as a base kibble. It's made
so
to
what
cover.
Does the chakika do?
Now the chakika is a base kibble, made it into a base kibble.
Why can't you just do it b'machshava? Why do you have to do a ma'aseh?
Oh, okay, that's a good question.
So I'm not sure. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Then we have chemes and kfisa. Now they're also made to hold liquids, but they're like leather pouches that hold liquids. So the loch is shetiknon. If you also set them up that they can stand, noitlin men liyadai. But sak v'kuba, which were never made to hold liquids, and you'd have to shemir them inside to waterproof them. Even though they were makabel tuma, they were makabel mashkim. You fix them. You can't use them for the tilas yadayim. The Gemara wants to ask the following question: instead of washing, what if you wear gloves or a shmata? You wrap the bread in so you don't touch the bread. Mi chayshina dil managa. Are you chayshin that you might touch it, and therefore you wouldn't be able to do that? You'd have to wash. Maybe instead of washing, you could just hold your sandwich in a shmata. Tashma. There was a famous story that happened in Masechah Sukkah, where they gave Reb Tzaddik a small amount. They gave him bread, and he ate less than the kabeya. He ate less than the kabeya. He held it in the shmata. When he ate sukkah, and he didn't bench because it was less than kabeya. So it's mashma that the pachas mikabeya solved all three problems. It solved the sukkah problem, solved the benching problem, and it solved the washing problem. My lav hakabeitza boy nitila shadayim. So no, dilma hakabeitza boy sukkah boy bracha. But the nitila shadayim, regardless, you don't need. So therefore, you don't have a raya from the Ma'aseh Reb Tzaddik. So the Gemara brings a raya from a Shmuel. Tashma, the Shmuel asked Rab. Shmuel once met Rab. The ka'achel b'mapa. Rab was eating. He didn't wash, or he didn't seem like he was washed because he was eating in the shmata. Omer Lei, Shmuel told Rav, is what you're doing appropriate? Let's turn over onto Amud Beis. Adin Kedain, are you doing appropriate? Not washing? Amalei, Rav told him, Avad, I washed. You want to know why I'm using a shmata? It's not instead of washing, it's in addition to washing. Dadik sarlai. I'm a funik and I can't touch the food. I want to hold on to the food only through a shmata. But Avad, I washed. Kisalak Reb Zera, when Reb Zera went up there to Yisrael, Ashkechinu Reb Ami v'Rabasi de Ka'achli bebeloy chamosais. They also had worn out leather vials, and they were using that to hold bread they shouldn't wash. So Reb Zera was astounded. Amar Trey Gavri Ravavri Kavasaichu, you great Rabbanim, Reb Ami Rabasi, Litu, with the Rabbi Shmuel, you should misunderstand the story of Rabbi Shmuel, and you thought that Rav was eating without washing? Hadaiti Kitsara Kama. Rav explained that he washed. He just wanted to use anyway. Something didn't touch and want to touch the bread. So how could you misinterpret that and think that you don't have to wash? Reb Zera jumped on Reb Ami and Ravasi too soon, because Reb Zera was wrong. Ishta Mitzeh, Reb Zera forgot, Hadamar of Tachlifa Baravimai Amar Shmuel. This Isser to not watch and hold a shmata because we're afraid you'll touch the bread, that's only for a Yisrael. But a tiru mapaloichle truma, but they allowed it for Kaihanim. The lo yitir mapaloichle tyrus. Why? Because Kaihanim is reasoning. Kaihanim are extra careful. Them you could trust that they won't by mistake touch the bread. But a Yisrael not. So it's funny, the Yisrael only has to wash because of the Kaihanim, but the Kaihanim can use a shmat and the Yisrael can. Now, V'Rab Ami, V'Rabatza Kehanim and Rab Ami and Rabatza Kehanim. So they could use a shmata because they were Kehanim. It's only for Yisrael where you have to wash. Frank Gemara, what if you're not touching the food? Somebody is feeding you. Iboyalahu. Oichel machmas maichel. Tzorach until shadai moila. The Gemara is later going to ask the opposite child. If you're feeding somebody, do you have to wash? But now we're talking about if you're being fed, do you have to wash? Zok the Gemara Toshma. Rav Huna bar Schoira. So does that mean Rav Huna was the son of Schoira? It doesn't mean bar Schoira, he was a businessman. Rav Huna bar Schoira, Hava Toy Kamed Rav Hamnuna. He was standing in front of Rav Hamnuna and he fed Rav Hamnuna. He gave him umta means meat, but if you look at the top toisvis, small little toisvis, pirishu pasima. He didn't give him pastrami, gave him a pastrami sandwich, and he fed it directly in to Rav Hamnuna's mouth. Nobody washed. Omerle, Rav Huna said, Ilav de Rav Hamnuna, if you weren't the great Rav Huna, who's extra zohir, loy safin I would have never fed you this way without you washing. My time, what would be the reason? So clearly, we all know if there's a gzera for Klal Yisrael, no rov could say, I'm better. I don't have to be concerned because I'm Zohar. It's for everybody. So what he was saying is, Avada, you don't need to wash. And you could use a shmat. And even though that's mutter, it's not the right thing to do. You have to wash. Rav Hamnuna, he could take advantage of the heter because he's takazor. So you have a raya. In fact, that if someone's feeding you, you're not mechuyev to wash. Zok to Gemara. Why? Because lav mishum dezor v'leinaga zok merloi. Rav Hamnuna wasn't not washing because he was a zahir, because you can't rely on that. The Zaritz, he was better than the Zahir. He was a Zaritz. He was proactive. When he anticipated that somebody was going to feed him, he ran to wash. So he taka washed. So you don't have a right that he didn't wash. And Rashi refers to the famous brisa of Rav Pinchas ben Yair. Zihirus maybe lidei zerizos. Zihirus maybe lidei zerizos. Zihirus means if you're in a situation, you'll be zar not to be over davera. The Zar is careful not to get into that situation in the first place. So Rav Huna was a Zoris, he took a wash. So Rav Meyer, 10 about Matthew this afternoon, Kohanim, we said, don't have to wash, they can hold the Shmata. There's a reason thing. Does that mean they automatically always wash? Or are they Zahirin, we don't need to worry that they're going to touch it. Pashas, the Megorah, right? We don't have to worry they're going to touch it. Even though there's reason, but even if they didn't wash, they still could hold it in the Shmata. Zog to Gemara Vaitim. Tashma. We're still looking for an answer, which we don't succeed in finding. If someone's feeding you, do you have to wash? Yomar B'zer Amarat. Lo yitin adam prusa l'soich piv shel shamas. If you're a guest at a table, you shouldn't be feeding the shamas food directly. Elam ken yedei boy shenot l'yon. Unless you know he washed. So the Gemara is going to soon bring a raya from here. By techois, you're not allowed to eat without washing, even though someone's feeding you, because you see the shamas have to wash. But let's put that aside for now, because the Braja talks about other things as well. Every kois that the shamas is given to drink, he makes a no bracha. You know why? Because he's not expecting any. So every kois he got, he was Mesiach Das after that kois, because he doesn't expect to get another one. But but pieces of bread that they give him, that he doesn't make a bracha because there he's not Mesiach Das. But for Rabbi Yochanan Amar, mevarach al kol prusa. So Amar Rav Papa, b'shlama de Rav Rabbi Yochanan, I understand the machlokes of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan in our brisa, because it's not really a machlokes; it's different scenarios. When there's a Talmud Chacham sitting by the table and knows that you're mechuyev to feed the waiter, so he knows he's going to get more food, and that's why he doesn't have to make a bracha when he gets more food, because he knows that it's going to be done kalach and he's going to be given food. But where did Rav say you have to make a bracha again and again? I'm sorry, where did Rabbi Yochanan say you have to make a bracha again and again? That's if he's serving at an event where they're not coming to Chacham, and he's not so sure they'll feed him, so therefore he's Mesiach Das after each bite, and he has to make a new bracha. So that I understand. But the problem is, Mikal Makayim Haka'amar Elim Ken Yodeya Shenotol Yadav. But you have a riot that you're not allowed to feed the waiter unless you know that he washed. So you see he has to wash. So the Gemara, a waiter is different. Shiny Sham is the Torah. The Shabbos is being serving everybody. So he's touching everyone's food, he'll touch his food. And therefore he needs to wash. But maybe a regular person doesn't have to. Rashi says, a Shabbos is touching everybody's food. Zok Rashi, that's not a kasha. A Shabbos can touch everybody's food without washing. The Gzera was only on the Oicha. There's no kana they made for the server. It's on the Oicha. So we're not worried about the Shabbos touching everybody else's. We're worried about the Shabbos touching his own food. And therefore, even though a regular Yid might not need to wash because he won't touch it by mistake, but a Shabbos is Torah, he might touch it. Now, the Brisa goes back to Tana Rabbana, L'yitin Adam Prusa L'Shabbos, Ben Shakos B'Yodoi, Ben Shakos B'Yodoi Shal Balabais. No matter who's holding the kois, you should not be feeding the Shabbos. Shema Yever Dvar Kal Kala B'Suda. Rashi says the balabais could be drinking, and he sees you giving his food to the waiter, he'll get upset. If he gets upset, he could choke. Or maybe he knows he doesn't have a lot of extra food, and he can't afford to give food to the waiter, and he's now very nervous. Or even if the shamus or you're holding the becher, he'll give you a dirty look, those eyes, and you won't concentrate on the becher, and you'll spill. That's why you shouldn't feed a shamus while anyone's drinking. Now, it's very interesting to note, why in the Geneva, if you're by a table, the food that's on the table, is that yours or is that the balabai's? Are you allowed to, if you're a guest in someone's house, are you allowed to take food and give it to one of his children? So this sounds like a trivial shayla, but it's actually a very important shayla. Because if you're sitting as a guest by someone's seder on the first night of Pesach, and you want to be mekayim the mitzvah of matzah, where it has to be your matzah, if there's just a pile of matzah in the middle of the table, that might be the balabai's matzah, and you're not going to be kind if you just take it and eat it, and you won't be oitzah. If the balabais gives you matzah beferish for you, so then he's giving it to you, it's yours. So you have to make sure, if it's just the matzah in the middle that everyone's taking, you have to make sure to tell the balabais, I want to be kind my matzah before I eat it.
Does that mean that you could take from a tikkun for your wife or not?
That's a good shaila. That's a good shaila. But pashtus, the purpose of a tikkun is to be mizaka somebody with a bracha. So
Yeah.
a wife's bracha, wives usually make more erlich brachas than we do.
Right. Right.
So for sure it's a good tikkun. Okay, zok the helig gemara vayt. So the Gemara doesn't seem to have a raya one way or another, whether if someone's feeding you, you have to wash. The Gemara is going to conclude at the end. Now we're asking the other side. The feeder, does he need the Netilas Yadayim? Tashma, the Tani Dvei Menashe, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Leimer, we're going to learn a story how the Jewish Child and Family Services wanted to take away Shammai Azakin's children because Shammai Azakin was neglecting his children. Let's look at this story. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Leimer, on Yom Kippur, where Rashi says they didn't wash Negel Wasser, and if she wants to feed her child, she can't touch the food with her ruach ra on her hands from not washing Negel Wasser. So she's allowed to wash one hand only, so that hand doesn't have a ruach ra, and that hand is what she will use to feed her child. They said about Shammai Azakin, he didn't want to even wash on Yom Kippur one hand to feed his child, and his child was screaming and crying and starving, and he said that we have to wait till after Yom Kippur. So the Jewish Family Services, the Gozralov, to Yaakov b'shtei. You don't want to wash one hand, you better wash both hands. They were gozer on him. To teach him a lesson that he can't neglect his children, he has to not be so frum, and he has to wash his hands so he can teach the kids. He can feed the kids. Frank Teichvis, how could you say that he didn't wash Negel Wasser? Avada, you're allowed to wash Negel Wasser in Yom Kippur, even if you're not eating. So let's look at Teichvis, a very interesting Teichvis. The second Teichvis on the daf. Hatamishum Shivsa, Pirish Bekundris, Ruach Ra, Shar al. Oh, you know what? I shouldn't do Teichvis, I didn't finish the Gemara yet. So the Gemara wants to bring a rye from here that even when you're feeding a child, you have to wash. You have a rye from here. On Marabaye, it's not a raya. Hasamishum Shivsa. There's a ruach ra. Rashi learns it's mamish the ruach ra of Negel Wasser. Avada, you're allowed to wash. Avada, that you have to wash even though you're feeding somebody. But a regular person who washes Negel Wasser, Mehechatesa, would have to wash their hands to feed somebody. Taichus has a different approach. Dog Taichus. Pirish Bekuntis ruach ra shar al yadayim shloi not l'shachas. If the Rabbeinu Tamafaris, of course not. The Bologna is seen as a pathologic. Anyway, it's mutter little yod of shachs b'yam kippurim, because the ruach ra that you wash Negel Wasser for is loigara mi meluchlachas petidu v'tzoya. If your hands are filthy, avadi you're allowed to wash your hands on Yom Kippur. They're meaning on shiraychet kedak Rabbeinu Choshen. Zok to Rabbeinu Tam, he's a chashidish yid. Ve'ein lach meluchlachas yoysim zeh. How could it be more dirty than a ruach ra? You know, shen yochel liga bepiv ube'einav. You're not allowed to touch any body openings before you wash Negel Wasser. The Bechulu Amrina of Perk Shmoyne Shirasim, it ticks as Yodoi, Mishum Basmela. So Zok Taish, that's not what we're talking about over here. Avada, she washed Negel Wasser. Avada Hila Zok washed Negel Wasser. So what Ruach Ra are we talking about that would be on food if you didn't wash? The new Ruach Ra. The Shiv said the Hacha Yesh Lefarish, Kamashapirish Rat, so Ruach Ra, Hashera Alo Oichel, there's a ruach ra that would go on food. If you want to feed somebody, especially a child, and you don't wash special to feed the child, there's a new ruach ra Tosfos tells us about. It could cause harm. So Tosfos, I never heard of anything like that. Nobody has a special rule that they have to wash their hands before they feed their child because of this sakana. We don't have that ruach matzuya, that ruach ra. The same way Melech Shadayim has disappeared, this ruach ra disappeared. Just like other ruach ra's disappeared. We're not makar on zugos. I mean, those people who have two shots of schnapps, they're usually makbid on zugos to have a third. Yeah. But otherwise, we're not makbid. Balagilui, if water gets left uncovered for a little while, not overnight, we are not makbid. But there was a time where they were makbid al tzurachba. It's a Chassidish Toisus.
Yeah.
So sagt der Heilige Gemara weiter.
That's why Chassidim do Rebbe Tamsman.
That's right. That's right. So I want to share with you a famous story that happened to everybody. When we were in Cheder, if I would come home and I would tell my father that Rebbe patched me, my father said, "Oh, wer weiß, was schlecht ist getan, was dummet ist doch gekommen, ich will doch eben noch afrask." Right? Today, if that happens, you call the police. Let's see how Shmuel's father reacted to when his Rebbe had him gegeben afrask.
Your father gave you an extra pot? I don't believe it.
No, he didn't.
You get that.
I was just speaking generally in the Alta Tzat, no, but that never happened to me. It never happened to me. You're right. Dr. Gemara, I was just saying it for the sensation of it. Because Dr. Gemara, it's a beautiful story. Tashima Davud Shmuel, Ashkechel Shmuel, the Kabachi. Shmuel's father came home one day and saw his little Shmuel killer giving a hand for Chayde in a vine. On the way, a Mike of office, man, tired as he, but was Weinstein. So Shmuel said, the Machin Rabbi might ever give me a frash. Why did you ever give you a frash? Normally, he told me, I was feeding the Rebbe's son some nuts, some hamoitzi, some bread. And he told me, he was upset. You're feeding my son and you didn't wash your hands? And I asked my mind, and he said, why aren't you washing your hands before you're feeding my son? So I told the Rebbe back, oh my way, who achel? Mano machina. I should wash my hands. And the Rebbe gave me a fras. So Avur the Shmuel said, Loy mistayed the legomer. It's bad enough that your Rebbe is a graba amauretz. In der weiß nicht, am darf nicht waschen when you're feeding somebody else. Mim chanam mochi, he had the chitbe to give you a fras ochit. So you see, Shmuel's father stuck up for him. Mm-hmm. So someone told me, yeah, if you would be like Shmuel, your father would stick up for you too. So Zak the Gemara, if you're being fed, you have to wash. But Michael, if you're feeding somebody, you could wrap side meat and cheese together in one shmata. Just make sure they don't touch each other. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, a different halacha. Imagine you show up at a rest area and you're sitting by the picnic table eating your fleischiks, and then another Yid comes and parks by the same picnic table and he's eating milchiks. There's no problem. Zebosha was a gvino, the ain't. Frank the Gemara, you said that the two pieces in your shmata aren't a lot of time. And what would be such a big deal if they touch? Might happen. It's sonyin b'tzonyin. If a cold piece of meat touches a cold piece of cheese, you don't have to take anything off. There's no problem. Amar Abaye, you're right. Neither kliva boy, but adacha milay boy, you would need hadach. Therefore, don't let him touch. You shouldn't need a dacha. And I told this is a continuation of the Friedrich Sugya. You probably came with water to wash. Maybe you came with only a revius. If you're going to need some of the water to make hadacha, then you're not going to have a revius to wash with. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Aimer, Shneach Sanoin Oichel Shulchan. Amar Rab Chanan Bar Ami Amar Shmuel. Lo Shanu El Shein Makirin Zeh. When do you say two people can share a table? That's if they don't know each other. So we're not concerned that they'll share meals. Amal Makirin Zeh, if they're friendly, also it's going to be us. We had a brayso that says similar to that. Shimon ben Gamliel Aimer, Bezach Sanoin Shinis Achul Pundik Echad. Two Achsanoim showed up at the same rest area. Zeba Mitzafon, and one's coming from the north. Zeba Midarim, and one's coming from the south. Basically, they don't recognize each other. Zeba B'chatichosoi, the Zeba B'gvinasoi. One has milchiks, one has fleischiks. Oichon al Shulchan Echad, Zeb Boser, Zeb Gvina, Be'ein Feichishi. So somebody asked me, Vosep is north and south, maybe east-west. I said, oh, east-west is not Megea. Because if you're going east-west, then you're on the thruway. On the thruway, the eastbound rest areas are not accessible to the westbound traffic. And the westbound traffic and the westbound rest areas are not accessible to the eastbound traffic. But if you're on the Garden State, where the rest areas are in the middle and they're accessible to both sides, There you can have a northern and a southbound in the same rest area. So that's what I held. It could be that shot in the Gemara. That there you can meet in the rest area.
So what's it? So there, even so, you'd allowed to eat in the same table.
If you don't know the guy, if you're strangers. But as long as v'lo yosrel b'tfisa achas. Now, what tfisa achas means is actually a machloikis, the mesifta and the archman. The mesifta means v'lo yosrel b'tfisa achas. That means literally sharing the meal. I'm eating from your meat and you're eating from my cheese. The arshko holds the means eating from one plate, but we're not sharing. You're telling me that's what the Bryce is trying to tell us, that we can't eat milk and meat together? It's Potched. What it means is like ain't tzvisachas. You're not allowed to eat on the same table unless there's a mafsik between you. What about shnei achim? What if there's two brothers who normally you look at two brothers, they're probably friendly, and if one's eating flesh and one eating mechlix, for sure they shouldn't be able to eat together. But what if these brothers are makbidin zelzeh? They don't get along. So maybe then you'd have to be chayshish. Now, what would be the law? Amar lei, Abai answered, you can't make exceptions. Because if people see these two brothers eating together, they're not going to know that these two brothers don't get along. They'll right away assume that you're allowed to eat together. They'll say, Kol asurikin nisurin, usrike baitus mutarin. This is like a cliche that's used to describe an interesting situation. The halach is when you're making shmur matzah, you're not allowed to form a design into it, because the time that you're busy forming the design could possibly allow the dough to become chametz, so they didn't allow any designs. But there was one matzah bakery, I don't know if it was Borough Park Matzah Bakery or the Samer or Kerestid, but they had a form. So they just put the matzah in a form without being oisik with it at all, so there was no delay, and there was no concern about that form. It wouldn't become chametz. But the Rabbanim still outlawed it. Why? Because Yom Rukala Sarik and Yisur and Usrike Baitas Mutarim, people aren't going to understand the distinction. And they'll say, if this is mutter, it's mutter to make. It's a mutter to make. You can't make a distinction. So that's why who didn't two brothers, even if these two brothers don't get along, they're still not allowed to eat on the same table without a mafsik. Frank the Gemara, if you're going to tell me such a rule across the board, well, if somebody only has one beged and it's dirty, normally you're not allowed to wash laundry on Cholamoid, but in such a case, so why did you say the same thing? Yoimru, why aren't you concerned? People are going to say, WhatsApp he's allowed to wash his beged and nobody else is allowed to. It must be that other people might be allowed to as well. Why don't you have that same kashash? Why did you say the same thing? So Hasam, on its face value, you could tell this is a different scenario. Why? Because if you have multiple clothing, when you take off one pair of pants to clean, you'll take the belt out of it and you'll put it into the next pair of pants. But if you only have one pair of pants, you'll wash the belt together with the baguette. So Amar Ravashi, the fact that he's washing with the belt, anybody will see, floor, this guy only has one baguette. What I don't understand is, if he only has one baguette, he's obviously standing in front of his washing machine in his intergachkas. Why isn't that all right? Elamai, Mefreknish Kakashis, I don't want to air anybody's dirty laundry. So Baruch Hashem, we were zoichen to finish Daf Kuf Zayin, and tomorrow we're in a chap Daf Kuf Ches. We'll kach Kuf Ches, and with kochen.
Yosy.
Yeah.
This Gemara Amar Aleph with the eating with the shmat and everything was for me there was a Leblina strikes again.
Oh, gewaltig.
For me.